In a city where millions pass the homeless without a second glance, one man's act of compassion is about to expose a billion-dollar secret that will stun the world. Michael Foster has lived on Manhattan's merciless streets for 7 years, forgotten by society, invisible to the masses. But when he discovers a trembling golden retriever in Central Park, he makes a decision that will shatter the barriers between two worlds. What he doesn't realize is that this dog belongs to Jerome Maxwell, America's most enigmatic billionaire, a phantom of Wall Street who vanished from public view 15 years ago, leaving behind whispers of a hidden fortune and an unprecedented mission. This isn't just a story about a lost dog. This is the explosive revelation of how a man who owned nothing but his conscience would uncover the most closely guarded secret in New York's history. A truth so powerful it's been protecting thousands of lives from the shadows, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The first drops of February rain cut through the dawn like shards of ice, stirring Michael Foster from a fitful sleep. 7 winters on Manhattan's streets had taught him that moisture was a silent killer, more treacherous than the cold itself. He'd watched too many of his street companions disappear during these brutal months, their stories ending in the shadowy spaces between skyscrapers that most people never bothered to look into. His fingers, cracked and reddened from exposure, traced the familiar ritual of survival. Each movement was a chess piece in the daily game against death. The careful folding of his rain-soaked cardboard bed, the strategic repositioning of his few possessions, the mental calculation of calories versus cash that could mean the difference between life and death. The alley off 42nd Street had become his kingdom of cardboard and concrete, wedged between a Michelin-starred restaurant and a boutique where handbags cost more than he used to make in a month. The photograph found him before he found it, slipping from his jacket pocket like a ghost demanding to be acknowledged. The edges had grown soft, worn smooth by thousands of touches, but the image remained sharp enough to cut deep. A younger Michael Foster, standing proudly in his social worker's uniform outside Riverside homeless shelter. The silver ID badge caught the light in the photograph, a beacon of purpose and dignity that now felt like a cruel joke. That man had believed in the system, had dedicated his life to pulling others back from the brink. Now he was the one in free fall. Well, if it ain't the professor himself, a gravelly voice cut through his reverie. Eddie materialized from the shadows, his Vietnam veteran's cap pulled low over eyes that had seen too much death in 2 different worlds. Looking mighty philosophical this morning. Just remembering when I was on the other side of the clipboard. Eddie. Michael tucked the photo away, but its image burned in his mind. How'd the VA appointment go? Eddie's laugh was a harsh bark that scattered a cluster of pigeons. 5th reschedule in 3 months. Told me my paperwork's trapped in some digital limbo between Manhattan and DC. Guess PTSD don't mean much in the age of cloud computing. He spat on the ground, a gesture of defiance against a system that had failed them both. The city was awakening. Around them, its pulse quickening with each passing minute. Michael had learned to read its rhythms like a survivor reads weather patterns. The first wave of delivery trucks meant the kitchen staff would soon arrive at Le Bernardin, sometimes leaving untouched meals in sealed containers by the back door. The click of heels on concrete signaled the arrival of financial district early birds, some of whom might drop their loose change without checking if it landed in his cup. "Coffee cart guys back on 45th. Eddie mentioned, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The one who treated us like humans last week." "Ahmed," Michael corrected. He made a point of learning names. It was one of the few pieces of his old life he refused to surrender. His daughter just got accepted to Columbia. Full ride. This information passed between them like precious currency. In their world, knowing who saw you as human could mean the difference between a meal and a hungry night, between shelter and exposure. Michael had mapped every compassionate face in a 10-block radius, every security guard who might look the other way, every restaurant worker who might accidentally drop an extra sandwich at closing time. He began his morning migration through the concrete canyons, timing his movements with military precision. The public bathroom in Bryant Park had a 7-minute window between the morning cleaning and the arrival of office workers. Marcus, the security guard who remembered Michael from better days, would buy him those precious minutes of privacy. 10 minutes, Mr. Foster, Marcus murmured, his eyes scanning for his supervisor. Place is all yours. The fluorescent lights of the bathroom cast harsh shadows across Michael's face as he performed his daily transformation. The small toiletry kit from St. Thomas's Church outreach program was his armor. Toothbrush, travel-sized toothpaste, and a disposable razor guarding its last 2 blades like precious jewels. He'd learned that cleanliness was a form of camouflage in a world that preferred its homeless to look the part. The face staring back from the scratched mirror told 2 stories at once. His eyes still held the sharp intelligence that had once made him one of the most effective social workers in Queens, but now they were set in a face weathered by exposure and hardened by necessity. He'd watched that transformation happen day by day, week by week, like a time-lapse photograph of a man becoming invisible. The morning crowd parted around him as he emerged, their designer suits and digital devices creating a wall of willful ignorance. He'd once walked among them, had worn a tie and carried a briefcase, had swiped a MetroCard without checking its balance. Now he existed in their negative spaces, in the shadows between their realities, watching as they spent more on a single lunch than he'd see in a week. 7 years ago, it had taken exactly 3 things to erase his existence: a massive heart attack that laughed at his health insurance cap, 3 missed rent payments while he recovered, and a system that turned out to be as fragile as the clients he'd once tried to help. The irony was sharp enough to draw blood. How many times had he told people they were just one emergency away from homelessness? Now he was living proof of his own warnings. The city rose around him like a glass and steel mountain range, its peaks disappearing into the February fog. He'd mapped every crevice of these urban canyons, learned which loading docks offered shelter from winter storms, which steam grates would provide life-saving warmth on the coldest nights. This wasn't survival anymore. It was a dark art, and he'd become one of its reluctant masters. What he didn't know as he turned towards Central Park's iron gates was that fate had marked this bitter Tuesday for something extraordinary. In a few hours, a simple act of kindness would tear open the veil between his world and one of unimaginable wealth, setting in motion events that would shake Manhattan's power structures to their core. But for now, he was just another shadow, moving through a city of light and darkness, carrying a worn photograph and the weight of 7 years' invisibility through streets that had forgotten how to see. Central Park held its own hierarchy of invisible people. There were the early morning bottle collectors, the noon panhandlers who worked the tourist crowds, and the twilight hustlers who sold promises of something better. Michael had carved out his own niche in the late morning hours, when the joggers had retreated to their offices and the lunch crowds hadn't yet emerged from their glass towers. The February wind cut through the trees like a blade, sending dead leaves skittering across his path. He was checking his usual spots, the overflowing trash bins near Bethesda Fountain, the recycling containers by the boathouse, when he heard it. A soft whimper, barely audible above the whisper of bare branches. At first, he thought it was just another trick of the wind. 7 years on the streets had taught him that hope was a luxury he couldn't afford. But then he heard it again, more distinct this time, coming from a dense cluster of bushes near the lake. Michael approached cautiously. In his world, unexpected situations usually meant danger. The bushes rustled, and then he saw it. A flash of golden fur, trembling with either cold or fear. A dog, and not just any street mutt. This was a purebred golden retriever, its coat matted but still showing signs of recent grooming. "Hey there," he called softly, keeping his distance. The dog's head snapped up, intelligent brown eyes fixing on him with an intensity that seemed almost human. Around its neck was a leather collar, unusually thick and well-crafted, with a single word engraved on a silver plate. Hope. Michael had seen enough expensive dogs in the park to know this one was special. The way it held itself, the alertness in its eyes. This wasn't just a pet, it was a trained companion. But what struck him most was the lack of fear in its gaze. The dog was watching him with what could only be described as careful assessment. "It's okay," he murmured, slowly lowering himself to a crouch. "I'm not going to hurt you." The words felt strange in his throat. How long had it been since he'd spoken gently to another living being? Most of his conversations these days were transactions, negotiations for space or resources. The dog took a tentative step forward, its nose twitching as it caught his scent. Michael remained perfectly still, letting it make the choice. Another step and another. Then he noticed something odd about the collar. There was a small metal component that didn't look like any pet tracker he'd seen before, and he'd helped. Enough lost dogs find their owners in his social worker days to know the difference. When the dog was finally within arm's reach, it did something that made Michael's breath catch. Instead of sniffing his extended hand, it deliberately sat down and lifted its right paw as if asking for a handshake. The gesture was so formal, so unexpected that Michael almost laughed. "Well, aren't you something special?" he said, carefully accepting the offered paw. The dog's fur was cold and damp, suggesting it had been out here for hours at least. As he examined the collar more closely, he noticed that the tracking device was far more sophisticated than he'd initially thought. Multiple lights, and what appeared to be a small display, though it seemed to be inactive. Making a decision that would change everything, Michael shrugged off his outer jacket, one of his most precious possessions for surviving winter nights. "You look like you could use this more than me right now," he said, slowly wrapping it around the shivering animal. The dog accepted the gesture with remarkable composure, its eyes never leaving his face. As he secured the jacket, his fingers brushed against something else in the collar, a hidden compartment, cleverly concealed in the leather. Inside was a small chip, about the size of a fingernail, glowing with a faint blue light. This was no ordinary pet accessory. This was military-grade technology. The dog pressed against his side, seeking warmth, and Michael felt something he hadn't experienced in years. The weight of responsibility for another living being. He had barely enough resources to keep himself alive, let alone care for a dog. But there was something about this animal, something in those knowing eyes that spoke of secrets and purpose. "Looks like we both could use a friend today," he said quietly, more to himself than the dog. Hope, if that was indeed its name, responded by placing its head on his knee, a gesture of trust that felt both natural and somehow choreographed. What Michael didn't realize, as he sat there in the cold morning air with a mysterious dog wearing his only winter jacket, was that he had just become part of something far larger than himself. The sophisticated tracking device, the hidden chip, the dog's unusual training, these were breadcrumbs leading to a truth that would shake the foundations of his world. For now, though, he had more immediate concerns. The dog needed food, and his own stomach was reminding him that he hadn't eaten since yesterday afternoon. "Well, Hope," he said, rising slowly to his feet, "let's see if we can find something for both of us." The dog stood with him, moving with a grace that seemed almost otherworldly in the gritty reality of his homeless existence. As they walked together toward his usual foraging grounds, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. not by the usual park security cameras, but by something more purposeful, more focused. Looking down at his new companion, he saw that Hope's eyes were scanning their surroundings with the same systematic attention he'd developed over years on the streets. This was no lost pet waiting to be found. This dog had found exactly who it was looking for. The local animal shelter loomed before them, its brick facade weathered by decades of city grime. Michael stood at the entrance, Hope sitting calmly by his side. Through the glass doors he could see the bustling morning activity. Volunteers, walking dogs, staff members filling food bowls, and the endless paperwork that accompanied animal welfare. "Something isn't right about this," he muttered, studying the QR code on Hope's tag. He had borrowed a smartphone from Ahmed at the coffee cart, but each scan attempt led to an error message. The code itself looked different from standard pet identifiers. Its pattern was more complex, almost like a military encryption. Inside, the shelter receptionist eyed him suspiciously. 7 years of homelessness had taught Michael to expect this look, the subtle mix of concern and distrust, wondering if he was there to cause trouble or seek warmth. "I found this dog in Central Park," he explained, watching Hope's reaction. The dog remained perfectly poised, those intelligent eyes surveying the room with uncanny awareness. "I'm trying to locate the owner." The receptionist, a young woman with kind eyes but a cautious demeanor, leaned forward to examine Hope's collar. "This is unusual," she said, frowning at the sophisticated tracking device. "Let me call our supervisor." While they waited, Michael noticed something peculiar. Every time someone in scrubs approached, Hope would shift slightly, positioning himself between Michael and the newcomer. It wasn't aggressive behavior, but it seemed protective, intentional. The supervisor arrived, a tall man in a pressed shirt with an official badge. "I'm Dr. Williams," he said, reaching for Hope's collar. Before his fingers could touch it, Hope gracefully stepped back, maintaining a precise distance. "That's odd," Dr. Williams muttered. "May I scan the chip?" Michael nodded, though he noticed Hope's ears perk up at the word scan. The supervisor brought out a standard microchip reader, but when he tried to use it, the device emitted a sharp beep and shut down. "I've never seen anything like this," Dr. Williams admitted, examining his now defunct scanner. "This collar, it's not standard issue. Where exactly did you find the dog?" As Michael described the location near the lake, he caught a glimpse of movement outside the shelter's window. A black SUV with tinted windows had parked across the street. Its presence felt deliberate, watchful. "Sir, I need to make some calls," Dr. Williams said, his tone suddenly formal. "Would you mind waiting?" But Hope had other ideas. The dog stood up, gently tugged at Michael's sleeve with his teeth, and moved toward the door. The gesture was clear. Time to leave. Michael's instincts, honed by years of reading subtle threats on the streets, screamed danger. Not immediate violence, but the kind of danger that came with too many questions and too much official interest. "Actually, I should go," he said, backing toward the exit. "If you find anything, I usually stay near Bryant Park." Outside, the February sun cast long shadows across the street. The black SUV was gone, but Michael could feel its presence lingering like a ghost. Hope walked close to his side, their steps naturally falling into sync. They made their way through back alleys and service entrances, taking the invisible paths Michael had mapped over years of avoiding attention. Hope matched his every move, understanding instinctively when to pause in doorways and when to slip through crowds. Near Times Square, Michael spotted another black SUV, this one idling at a corner. Its windows reflected the neon signs above. But he knew someone was watching from behind that dark glass. Hope noticed it too, subtly changing their course without breaking stride. At a hot dog cart, the vendor who knew Michael waved them over. "Hey, friend," the man said, glancing at Hope. "Nice dog. Very special looking." His emphasis on the Word special caught Michael's attention. Thanks, Joey, Michael replied, accepting the offered hot dog. As he took it, Joey pressed something into his hand. A folded note. Only when they reached the relative safety of his alley did Michael read, "The dog chose you. Watch for the signal." The paper was heavy, expensive. In the corner, a tiny symbol was embossed, a stylized letter M surrounded by a circle. Hope sat beside him, alert and watchful. In the fading afternoon light, the tracking device on his collar began to pulse with a soft blue glow. Michael realized he had stumbled into something much bigger than a lost pet. The question was, had he stumbled, or had he been carefully chosen? Evening shadows crept between Manhattan's towers as Michael watched the street from his hidden vantage point. The folded note from Joey felt heavy in his pocket, its expensive paper and mysterious symbol burning questions into his mind. Hope lay beside him, alert and watchful, those intelligent eyes scanning the growing darkness. The black SUVs had become more numerous throughout the afternoon. Michael counted 4 different vehicles, each taking turns monitoring the blocks around. His usual haunts. Their presence transformed familiar streets into a maze of uncertainty. Even Eddie had noticed something was different. "Those ain't cops," Eddie had whispered earlier, his veteran instincts sharp as ever. "Military, maybe, or private security. They moved too clean, too coordinated." A sudden movement caught Michael's attention. A woman in an elegant charcoal suit stepped out of one of the SUVs. She moved with deliberate grace, her posture suggesting both authority and careful training. Through the gathering gloom, he watched her speak into what appeared to be a normal phone, but Hope's reaction told a different story. The dog's ears perked forward, tracking the woman's every movement with focused intensity. Security cameras along the block began to move in perfect synchronization, all turning away from the woman's position. Michael had spent years mapping the city's surveillance patterns. This wasn't random. Someone was controlling the entire grid. "What have you gotten me into, friend?" he murmured to Hope. The dog responded by pressing closer, its body temperature, offering welcome warmth against the February chill. The tracking device on Hope's collar pulsed once, twice, then settled into a steady rhythm that matched the woman's movements. From his jacket pocket, Michael pulled out the message again. "The dog chose you. Watch for the signal." The embossed M symbol caught the fading light, seeming to shift and change as he turned the paper. Something about its design tugged at his memory, a glimpse of something he should recognize. A soft, electronic tone emanated from Hope's collar, barely audible but complex in its pattern. The woman in the suit immediately turned toward their location, though Michael knew they were well concealed. She smiled, not the practiced smile of a professional, but something genuine and almost relieved. "Welcome to the first step, Mr. Foster," she said, her voice carrying clearly despite the urban noise. "Hope has made an excellent choice, as always." The dog's tail wagged once, acknowledging its name, but it remained positioned protectively beside Michael. The woman made no move to approach, instead placing a small package on a nearby bench. "Your past kindness has not gone unnoticed," she continued. 7 years ago, you helped a young man at Riverside Shelter. You gave him your last $20 for a bus ticket home. That young man now runs our West Coast operations." Michael remembered. Thomas Parker, barely 18, running from an abusive home. He had never expected to hear that name again, let alone like this. "When you're ready," the woman said, gesturing to the package. "Hope will show you the way. Mr. Maxwell has been watching, Mr. Foster. We all have." She turned and walked away, her movements liquid and precise. The SUVs began to pull away one by one, their departure as choreographed as their arrival. Only then did Hope stand, gently tugging Michael toward the bench. Inside the package, wrapped in the same expensive paper as the note, lay a new smartphone. Its screen came to life at Hope's proximity, displaying a single message. Phase 1. Initiated. Welcome to Maxwell's mission. Above them, the city's cameras resumed their normal patterns, but Michael knew nothing would be normal again. He had been invisible for 7 years, a ghost in the margins of society. Now he had been seen, chosen, and recruited by forces he barely understood. Hope's collar emitted another soft tone, and the phone in Michael's hand illuminated with a map. A path appeared, leading deep into the heart of Manhattan's most exclusive district. The dog looked up at him expectantly, those knowing eyes asking a simple question. "Are you ready?" "Well," Michael said, feeling the weight of change settling around him. "I guess we're in this together now." He stood, tucking the phone into his pocket, and felt the last traces of his invisibility falling away. Whatever game this was, whatever mission Maxwell had designed, it began tonight. Looking down at his extraordinary companion, Michael saw Hope's tail wag once in confirmation. This wasn't just a lost dog. This was a messenger, a guide, and perhaps, most incredibly, a friend. Together, they stepped out of the shadows and into a world of secrets, surveillance, and impossible possibilities. The public library stood before them like a stone sentinel in the gathering night, its marble lions casting long shadows across. The steps. Michael checked the phone again, confirming what Hope already seemed to know. The glowing map led directly to the building's ornate entrance. "Closed for private event," read the sign on the heavy doors. But when Michael approached, a security guard materialized from the shadows. The man's uniform bore no name tag, just a small silver pin with the now familiar M symbol. "Mr. Foster," the guard said, opening the door, "please follow the lights." Inside, the grand reading room stretched out in darkness, save for a single lamp illuminating a distant table. Hope padded forward confidently, leading Michael through canyons of books. Their footsteps echoed in the emptiness, each sound amplified by marble and mahogany. On the table lay a single envelope, cream-colored and thick, sealed with dark blue wax bearing Maxwell's emblem. Beside it sat an old leather-bound book, Great Expectations, by Charles Dickens. Michael's hands trembled slightly as he broke the seal. The paper inside was handwritten, the script elegant but somehow urgent. "Mr. Foster, 7 years ago, you gave everything to save one life. Your career, your home, your future, all sacrificed to pay for a stranger's heart surgery. Society called this a mistake. I call it proof. You see, I have spent 15 years searching for people like you. People who understand that true wealth lies not in what we keep, but in what we give away. Hope has been my messenger, finding those rare souls who maintain their humanity even when the world strips everything else away. What you discover next will challenge everything you believe about power, wealth, and purpose. The book before you contains coordinates to my private shelter network, a kingdom of compassion built in society's shadows. But remember this, knowledge brings responsibility. Once you step through this door, there is no returning to invisibility. You have until midnight to decide, JM. The smartphone in Michael's pocket chimed softly. A timer appeared. 47 minutes until midnight. Opening the book revealed pages of carefully altered text. Certain letters were marked with nearly invisible dots, forming a complex code. In the margins, tiny numbers sequence created what looked like GPS coordinates. Hope sat watching him, those intelligent eyes reflecting the lamplight. The dog's collar began pulsing in a new pattern, matching Michael's heartbeat. Memories flooded back. The young mother in the emergency room, her infant son crying as monitors beeped in alarm. The insurance company's denial. His own savings barely. Enough for a down payment on a house transferred in full. The surgery successful. The child saved, and his own life irreversibly altered. The world had called him foolish. His colleagues, his family, even his fiancée had walked away. Only Eddie had understood, offering him that first piece of cardboard when the eviction notice came. Now, here sat another choice. The phone's timer counted down relentlessly. Through the library's towering windows, he could see black SUVs positioned. At every corner, waiting, protecting, or perhaps preventing escape. "What do you think, Hope?" he whispered. The dog responded by placing a paw on the coded book, then looking toward the library's darkened depths. Somewhere in the shadows, a door clicked open. Michael felt the weight of 7 years of invisibility pressing against him. He had survived by staying unnoticed, unremarkable. This message promised the opposite. It offered purpose, but demanded exposure. The timer read 39 minutes. Soon he would have to choose, remain a ghost in society's margins, or step into a world of dangerous philanthropy. Hope stood, tail wagging once, and took a step toward the waiting darkness. The subway token felt impossibly heavy in Michael's palm, its surface marked with the same stylized M he was beginning to see everywhere. The coordinates from the book had led them here, to an abandoned subway entrance near Columbus Circle that shouldn't exist. "You sure about this?" he asked Hope. The dog's response was to press its nose against a seemingly solid wall. A panel slid aside silently, revealing a card reader with Maxwell's emblem. Michael placed the token against it. The wall parted, exposing a pristine elevator that looked more suited to a luxury hotel than a forgotten subway station. Hope stepped in confidently, and Michael followed. They descended for what felt like minutes, the digital floor indicator showing numbers that shouldn't exist beneath Manhattan. B12, B13, B14. When they finally stopped at B15, Michael's ears had popped twice. The doors opened to reveal an underground city. Stretches of polished corridors branched in every direction, each marked with different colored lines on the floor. People moved purposefully through the space, many wearing the same silver M pin he'd seen on the security guard. But what struck him most were the others people there. A group of formerly homeless veterans sat in what looked like a medical waiting room, receiving care from professionals in pristine white coats. In another area, children from the streets were attending classes, their faces clean and focused, their clothes new but practical. "Welcome to Haven Station," a familiar voice said. The woman from the SUV stood nearby, her suit exchanged for more casual attire. "I'm Sarah Chen, Operations Director. We've been expecting you." Hope trotted over to her, accepting a brief pat before returning to Michael's side. "How long has this been here?" Michael asked, watching as more people emerged from other corridors. 15 years, Sarah replied. After Maxwell disappeared from public view, he began building these stations throughout the city. There are 12 now, each serving different needs. This is our main facility. They walked past a commercial kitchen where people were being trained in culinary arts, then a computer lab filled with intense students. Every face Michael saw belonged to someone he recognized from the streets above. "But how is this possible?" he asked. "The permits alone." Sarah smiled. "Maxwell owns most of the buildings above us. The paperwork shows these as standard storage. Basements. We operate in the blind spots of bureaucracy." They paused at a vast window overlooking what appeared to be an underground garden, complete with artificial sunlight. People in therapy sessions walked among the plants, their body language showing healing in progress. "The subway token you used," Sarah explained, "is our key system. We distribute them carefully through people like Hope. Each token is coded to the individual, their needs, and their potential role in our network." A wall of screens caught Michael's attention. They showed various locations around Manhattan, many featuring people he knew from the streets. Eddie appeared on one, still. "In his usual spot, we watch," Sarah said softly. "We identify those who maintain their humanity despite everything. People who help others even when they have nothing themselves. People like you, Michael." In another room, he saw rows of sophisticated communications equipment. Operators spoke quietly into headsets, coordinating what seemed to be a vast web of assistance and intervention. Maxwell believes true change happens in the shadows, Sarah continued. While billionaires make headlines with token donations, we build real solutions in the spaces society has forgotten. Hope led them to a final. Dr. marked simply communications. Inside, a bank of screens displayed messages from other stations across the city. Michael recognized the coding system from the book, now moving in real time across the displays. "This is where you come in," Sarah said, gesturing to an empty station. "Your years on the streets, your background in social work, your proven compassion. We need people who understand both worlds." On the main screen, a new message appeared. "Welcome to the network, Mr. Foster. Ready to change some lives?" The penthouse elevator opened silently onto the 87th floor of Maxwell Tower, revealing a space that seemed to float above Manhattan. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view that made Michael's heart skip. From this height, the city he'd called home for 7 years looked like a glittering jewel box. "Mr. Maxwell will see you shortly," Sarah said, gesturing toward a sitting area. "Hope knows the way." The dog padded confidently across polished marble floors, leading Michael past priceless artworks. But something felt odd about the space. Despite its grandeur, there were subtle signs of utility rather than luxury. The furniture was elegant but sturdy, the kind that could withstand daily use. The walls displayed not just art, but maps and data screens showing activity from the underground stations. A glass case caught his attention. Inside lay a worn social worker's ID badge, identical to the one in his crumpled photograph. The name read, "Thomas Maxwell, NYC Social Services, 1982. "My first real job," a voice said from behind him. "Before Wall Street, before the billions. I walked the same streets you did." Michael turned to face Jerome Maxwell for the first time. The man before him defied every expectation. No expensive suit, no air of superiority. Instead, he wore simple khakis and a button-down shirt, his silver hair slightly disheveled. Only his eyes betrayed his power, sharp and calculating beneath their compassionate surface. "Hope has told me a lot about you," Maxwell continued, scratching the dog's ears affectionately. "The dog speaks?" Michael asked, unable to hide his surprise. Maxwell laughed, a genuine sound that softened his features. In her way, the technology in her collar does more than track. It monitors interactions, emotional responses, ethical choices. Hope finds people who still care, even when the world has given them every reason not to. He walked to the window, gazing down at the city below. "Do you know why I vanished from public view 15 years ago, Mr. Foster?" Michael shook his head. "I discovered something about wealth. The more visible it is, the less it can truly accomplish. Real change requires invisibility, like that $20 you gave away 7 years ago. No cameras, no recognition, just one human helping another." Maxwell pressed his hand against the glass. The window transformed into a giant display, showing a complex web of connections. Red lines traced paths between underground stations. Blue markers indicated active operations, and green dots represented success stories. "Every light represents a life changed," Maxwell explained. "Not through grand gestures or public charity, but through understanding what people really need. Sometimes it's medical care, sometimes education, sometimes it's just knowing they haven't been forgotten." He turned back to Michael. "But my network needs people who understand both worlds. People who've lived in the shadows, but remember the light. Hope has chosen you for something more than just another rescue." A wall panel slid aside, revealing a room filled with monitors. Each screen showed a different person Michael recognized. And from the streets, their stories and needs displayed in detailed profiles. "This is where the real work happens," Maxwell said. "Not in boardrooms or charity galas, but in understanding each story, each struggle. I need someone who can bridge these worlds. someone who's walked in both pairs of shoes. The implications slowly dawned on Michael. You want me to help run this? I want you to help expand it, Maxwell corrected. Your experience, your compassion, your understanding of life on both sides. These are rare qualities, Mr. Foster, qualities this operation desperately needs. Hope moved between them, her tail wagging slowly as she looked from one man to the other. The tracking device on her collar pulsed with a new pattern, somehow both questioning and encouraging. The view screen behind them shifted, showing new data. Resources ready to be deployed, lives waiting to be changed, a system poised for expansion. From this height, Michael could see both worlds clearly. The glittering surface of Manhattan wealth and the shadows where he'd lived for 7 years. For the first time, he understood that his fall from one world to the other hadn't been a tragedy. It had been preparation. The old newspaper clipping trembled in Michael's hands as he read the headline, "Maxwell Family Tragedy Strikes Wall Street Dynasty." The article, dated 15 years ago, told a story that had never made it into the public. Narrative about Jerome Maxwell's disappearance. My wife Caroline worked at a homeless shelter in the Bronx, Maxwell said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of memory. She believed that wealth meant nothing if it couldn't lift others up. The papers called it a random act of violence when she was killed. It wasn't random. He touched a control panel, and a series of documents appeared on the wall screen. Police reports, private investigator findings, financial records. Caroline had discovered a network of corruption. City officials diverting funds meant for shelters, health care for the homeless being sold to private clinics, children's services money disappearing into offshore accounts. Hope pressed against Michael's leg as the story unfolded. The dog's presence felt like an anchor in a sea of revelations. She was going to expose everything, Maxwell continued. The night before she planned to take the evidence public, someone followed her home. The police called it a robbery gone wrong. $20 and a wedding ring, they said. That's what her life was worth to them. The wall of documents shifted, revealing photographs of Caroline Maxwell. She had her husband's same compassionate eyes, the same subtle smile that suggested hidden knowledge. In every photo, she was working with the homeless, helping at shelters, sitting with children. I spent 2 years hunting the people responsible, Maxwell said, not for revenge. Caroline would have hated that. No, I followed the money. Every corrupt official, every fraudulent contract, every stolen dollar. I built a case so complete it brought down 3 mayors and 2 governors, but that wasn't enough. He led Michael to another room, smaller but somehow more significant. The walls were covered with thousands of photographs, each showing a person whose life had been changed by Maxwell's hidden network. Michael recognized faces from the underground stations, from the streets, from the success stories he'd witnessed. This was Caroline's real legacy, Maxwell explained. She taught me that true power isn't in destroying evil, but in building good. So I took my billions and went underground, literally, built a network that could accomplish what she dreamed of, a system to help people without the corruption, without the politics, without the public show of charity. A particular photograph caught Michael's attention, a young mother and child standing in front of a newly opened shelter. The date stamp showed it was from 7 years ago, the same time Michael had given away his savings for a stranger's heart. Surgery. Everything connects, Maxwell said, noting Michael's recognition. That shelter exists because of Caroline. The mother received help because of the systems we built, and her child lived because of your sacrifice. A sacrifice that put you on these streets where hope could find you. The dog's collar emitted a soft tone, and the wall of photographs transformed into a complex digital display. It showed the interconnected web of lives touched by Maxwell's network, each point representing a story, a change, a possibility. Caroline had a saying, Maxwell continued, his hand resting on a console. She believed every act of kindness created ripples that could change the world. But kindness needs protection to flourish. It needs resources, security, and people who understand both the darkness and the light. The display focused on a new data set showing current operations across the city. Hundreds of points of light, each representing an ongoing mission of mercy. This is why Hope chose you, Michael, not just because of your compassion, but because you understand. You've seen how a single act of kindness can change everything. You've lived in both worlds. Now I'm offering you the chance to bridge them. A new document appeared on the screen, bearing Maxwell's distinctive M seal, a formal invitation to join the inner circle of his hidden philanthropic empire, to step from the shadows into a different kind of light. The formal invitation card sat untouched on the polished conference table. Its surface gleamed with Maxwell's embossed seal, the thick paper stock speaking of wealth and power. Michael stood at the window of the meeting room, watching night fall over Manhattan, feeling the weight of choice pressing down on him. "We understand if you need time," Sarah said softly from the doorway. "It's a lot to process." Below, the city transformed into a constellation of lights. Somewhere down there, Eddie would be settling into his usual spot. The coffee cart vendor would be counting his day's earnings. The library security guard would be starting his night shift. All the invisible people he'd lived among for 7 years, now seen through new eyes. Hope sat quietly beside him, the dog's collar displaying a gentle, pulsing blue light. On the table, beside the invitation, lay a complete dossier of Michael's life, every act of kindness he'd performed, both as a social worker and as a homeless man, every person he'd helped, every sacrifice he'd made. Maxwell's surveillance had been thorough. "Why me?" Michael finally asked. "There are others out there, better people, people who haven't given up." Sarah moved to stand beside him. "That's exactly why Hope chose you. You never gave up. You just changed battlefields." The wall screen activated, showing live feeds from the underground stations, a veteran receiving medical care, a family moving into temporary housing, a teenager attending coding classes. Each scene represented a life in transition, a story being rewritten. "But joining us means leaving your old life behind," Sarah continued. "Complete transformation, new identity, new purpose, new responsibilities. The person you were has to disappear entirely." The invitation seemed to grow heavier with each word. Michael picked it up, feeling the texture of possibility beneath his fingers. The card contained more than just an offer. It held a complete new identity, bank accounts, credentials, access codes to Maxwell's network. "And what about the people I know?" Michael asked. "Eddie, the others?" "They'll be taken care of," Sarah assured him. "But you won't be able to contact them directly, not at first. Security protocols." Hope nudged Michael's hand with her nose, drawing his attention to the window again. A black SUV had pulled up outside. 2 figures emerged, heading toward the building entrance. Even from this height, Michael recognized their professional stance, their purposeful movement. "Government agents," Sarah explained. "They've been investigating Maxwell's network for years. Never getting close, but never giving up. If you accept our offer, they become your problem too." The weight of the invitation seemed to multiply. This wasn't just about helping people anymore. It was about protecting an entire shadow network of compassion, about keeping hope alive in a world that often seemed determined to extinguish it. "How long do I have to decide?" Sarah glanced at her watch. "The agents will reach this floor in exactly 4 minutes. By then, you need to either be gone or be one of us. There's no middle ground." Hope's collar emitted a soft tone, and the wall screen changed. It showed Eddie's usual spot, but something was wrong. 2 men in suits were approaching him, showing badges, asking questions. "They're getting closer," Sarah said quietly. "They know something's happening. They just don't know what." The invitation felt warm in Michael's hands, as if responding to his touch. This was more than a choice between poverty and comfort. It was a decision to step into a shadow war, to protect not just individual lives, but the very possibility of hidden kindness. 3 minutes remained. In his pocket, the photograph of his younger self seemed to burn. The social worker who believed in the system, now being offered a chance to build something better, something hidden, something true. Hope stood, tail wagging, one's eyes fixed on Michael with that same knowing look he'd seen in the park. The dog had chosen him for this moment, had seen something in him that he'd forgotten existed. The underground command center hummed with quiet efficiency. Michael stood before a vast digital map displaying Maxwell's complete network across Manhattan. Glowing lines connected 12 underground stations, each a hidden sanctuary of hope and transformation. "Everyone here has a story similar to yours," Sarah explained, gesturing to the operators working at various stations. Maria over there was a trauma surgeon who lost everything in a malpractice suit. Now she coordinates our medical operations. James was a tech executive who gave up his fortune to protect whistleblowers. He runs cybersecurity. Hope trotted ahead of them, greeting various staff members who all seemed to know her. The dog's presence clearly meant something special too. These people, a large screen dominated the central wall, displaying a complex web of ongoing operations. Each glowing point represented a life in transition, a person being guided from darkness to light. The map itself was a masterpiece of technology and compassion, tracking not just locations but the ripple effects of each intervention. "Watch this," Sarah said, touching a control panel. The map zoomed in on a single point of light. Data streamed across the screen, showing the complete transformation of a homeless family. Housing, education, healthcare, employment, every aspect, coordinated with surgical precision. "We call this the butterfly protocol," a new voice said. A tall woman approached, her silver hair and confident stride marking her as someone important. One change triggers another and another until the entire pattern shifts. "Michael, meet Dr. Rachel Chen," Sarah introduced. "She designed our intervention protocols." "The same ones that brought you to us," Rachel added with a knowing smile. "Nothing here happens by chance. Every encounter, every opportunity, every choice is part of a larger design." They moved through the command center, passing teams engaged in various aspects of Maxwell's mission. A group of analysts tracked financial patterns, identifying corruption and redirecting resources. Another team coordinated with a network of sympathetic officials, protecting the operation's secrecy. "Here's where it gets interesting," Rachel said, leading them to a secure room. The walls displayed profiles of people Michael recognized from the streets. Each face was connected to a web of data, showing potential and possibility rather than problems and deficits. "This is our next wave," she explained. "People like you who maintain their humanity despite everything. Hope has been watching them, evaluating them. Some will join us here, others will receive help to rebuild their lives, but all of them matter." A familiar face appeared on the screen. Eddie, his profile complete with his military service record, his struggles with PTSD, his small acts of kindness that had gone unnoticed by all except Hope's watchful eyes. "Your friend is already part of the plan," Rachel assured him, "though his path will be different from yours." The screen shifted to show a comprehensive overview of Maxwell's empire. Underground medical facilities that rivaled private hospitals, educational centers teaching everything from basic skills to advanced technology, workshops training people for new careers, legal teams fighting quietly but effectively for systemic change. "This isn't charity," Rachel stated firmly. "This is revolution by stealth, changing the world one life at a time, hidden from those who would stop us if they knew our true scope." Hope padded over to a particular display, drawing their attention. It showed the ripple effects of Michael's own act of kindness 7 years ago. The child whose life he'd saved was now in college, volunteering at a youth center, creating his own ripples of change. "You see," Rachel said softly, You were part of Maxwell's network before you even knew it existed. That's why Hope chose you. You already understood the most important truth. Which is, Michael asked, that real change happens in the shadows, one quiet choice at a time. The most powerful acts of kindness are the ones the world never sees. Maxwell's private office defied expectations. Instead of mahogany and marble, the space felt more like a command bunker. Walls of screens displayed real-time data from across the network, while a worn leather journal sat open on a simple desk. The billionaire himself sat in an ordinary office chair, his attention focused on Hope as she settled at his feet. "Do you know what changed me, Mr. Foster?" Maxwell asked, gesturing for Michael to sit. "Not Caroline's death. That broke me, yes. But the real change came 3 days after her funeral." He picked up the journal, its pages yellowed with age. "I found her diary. 20 years of observations, insights, dreams. But it was her last entry that shifted everything." Maxwell opened to a marked page and began to read. "Today I watched a homeless man share his last dollar with a hungry child. In that moment I understood. Wealth isn't what we have, it's what we give when we have nothing left to give." The journal trembled slightly in Maxwell's hands. She wrote that the morning she died. Her last words to the world were about the power of kindness in the face of poverty. He passed the journal to Michael. The handwriting was elegant but urgent, the pages filled with observations of life on the streets. Caroline Maxwell had documented hundreds of small acts of compassion, creating a map of humanity's resilience. "After reading this, I spent 6 months living on the streets," Maxwell continued. "No money, no contacts, no safety net. I needed to understand what Caroline saw. That's when I met the first Hope." "The first?" Michael asked. Maxwell smiled. "Yes. The dog who chose you is Hope 7. Each one specially trained, enhanced with proprietary technology, programmed to recognize specific human behaviors. But more importantly, each one carries forward a legacy of finding those rare individuals who never lose their humanity, no matter how dark their circumstances become." He stood and walked to a wall of photographs. Each showed a different golden retriever, each wearing the same special collar, each paired with a person whose life had been transformed. "Caroline started the program," Maxwell explained. "She rescued the first Hope from a shelter, trained her to help identify people for our assistance programs. The dog had an incredible ability to sense genuine kindness. After Caroline died, I expanded the program, added technology, refined the training, but kept the core mission the same." Hope 7 lifted her head, her collar pulsing with a soft blue light. Maxwell reached down to scratch her ears. "They're more than dogs. They're talent scouts for humanity's better angels." The screens around them shifted, showing scenes from Michael's life on the streets. Small moments Maxwell's surveillance had captured, sharing food with newcomers, helping elderly homeless navigate the shelter system, teaching children to read in hidden corners of the library. "You never stopped being a social worker," Maxwell observed. "You just lost the title and the paycheck, but Hope saw what really mattered. Your actions spoke louder than any credentials." He returned to his desk and pressed a button. A hidden panel opened, revealing a safe. Inside lay a stack of identical journals, each bearing a year and a number. "I've continued Caroline's work," Maxwell said, pulling out the most recent volume, "documenting the invisible acts of kindness that hold our world together. The stories that never make the headlines, but change lives every day." Opening the current journal, he turned to a fresh page. "Your story belongs here, Mr. Foster. Not just your past acts of kindness, but what you'll do with the resources I'm offering. The question is, are you ready to help write the next chapter?" The training manual projected on the wall looked more like military intelligence protocols than charitable guidelines. Michael studied the complex flowcharts and decision trees that made up Maxwell's outreach program. each page revealing layers of sophisticated strategy he never would have imagined existed in philanthropic work. "Your first assignment requires special handling," Sarah explained, scrolling through the digital display. "We've identified a cluster of veterans near Washington Square Park. Their situation is complicated." Hope sat attentively beside them, her collar synchronizing with the display as it showed profiles of the veterans. Michael recognized several faces from his time on the streets. "These men aren't just homeless," Sarah continued. "They're protecting others, running an unofficial shelter network out of abandoned buildings. But developer Thomas Crown is moving to demolish those buildings next month." The screen filled with documents, demolition permits, city council meetings, property records, a web of corporate interests, all leading back to Crown developments. "Our usual methods won't work here," Sarah said. "These veterans don't trust the system, and with good reason. That's why we need you. You speak their language. You've lived their reality." The training manual shifted to a new section titled Operation Safeguard. Michael watched as his own profile appeared, now updated with his new credentials and resources. The transformation from homeless man to Maxwell operative was laid out in precise detail. "This is your operational budget," Sarah said, bringing up a secure financial interface. The number made Michael's breath catch. More money than he'd seen in 7 years, all dedicated to saving a handful of lives. "Remember," she cautioned, "it's not about throwing money at the problem. It's about strategic intervention, building trust, creating sustainable solutions." Hope padded over to another screen, triggering a display of the veterans' daily routines, their patrol patterns, their supply runs, their careful organization of limited resources. They'd created a military precision support system running on nothing but willpower and brotherhood. "Your background as a social worker matters," Sarah noted, "but your street experience matters more. These men need to know you understand both sides of the invisible line." The manual outlined the steps: initial contact through shared connections, gradual trust building, careful introduction of resources. Each phase planned with the detail of a covert operation. "Maxwell's first rule," Sarah reminded him, "real change happens in whispers, not announcements. Help them quietly. Let them keep their dignity and their independence. Just give them the tools to expand what they're already doing." A new section of the manual appeared, showing Michael's full capabilities within the network: access to safe houses, medical care, legal support, job training, an entire infrastructure of hope, hidden behind layers of security and discretion. "One more thing," Sarah said, pressing a button. A hidden panel opened, revealing a set of equipment that wouldn't have looked out of place in a spy movie. Standard field kit for all operatives, encrypted communications, emergency protocols, contingency, resources. Hope's collar chimed softly as Michael examined the gear. Each piece represented a capacity he'd wished for during his years of social work. The power to make real change, not just file reports and hope for the best. "Remember," Sarah said, closing, "the manual display. You're not just helping these men. You're recruiting them. The best ones will become part of our network, extending our reach, multiplying our impact." Michael understood. He wasn't just being trained to provide help. He was being taught to recognize and nurture the same qualities Hope had seen in him, to find others who could join Maxwell's invisible army of compassion. The training manual's final page displayed a simple message: change the world quietly, leave no traces, only transformation. The medical record spread. Across the secure terminal told a story Maxwell had kept hidden from the world. Page after page documented Caroline Maxwell's work with therapy dogs in homeless shelters, particularly her groundbreaking program using canines to identify and support individuals with untreated trauma. Caroline pioneered this approach, Maxwell explained, his voice soft with memory. She discovered that dogs could recognize emotional resilience in people, even when humans couldn't see it. Michael studied Hope's certification documents, understanding now why the dog's behavior had seemed so precisely targeted. The collar wasn't just technology. It was the culmination of years of research into human psychology and animal intuition. But it goes deeper than that, Maxwell continued, pulling up his own medical file. After Caroline died, I spent 2 years in a very dark place. The first Hope found me contemplating the end of everything on a bridge in Central Park. The dog at Michael's. Veet lifted her head, as if recognizing her predecessor's story. Her collar pulsed with a gentle, comforting rhythm. The dog wouldn't leave me alone, Maxwell said. Just sat there watching, waiting. Finally, she led me to one of Caroline's old shelters. Inside, I found people worse off than me, still fighting to help others. It changed everything, the screen, filled with brain scan images showing the neurological impact of human-canine bonding in trauma recovery. Caroline's research had been leading towards something revolutionary before her death. Your own trauma drew Hope to you, Maxwell explained. Not just your homelessness, but the deeper wound. The loss of purpose, of identity, the same thing I went through. Michael felt the truth of those words. His hand instinctively found the photograph in his pocket, his anchor to his former life. How did you know? The way you survived on the streets, always helping others, maintaining your humanity, but never quite believing you could return to your old life. Classic signs of what Caroline called purpose trauma. The medical record shifted to newer data showing the success rates of Maxwell's enhanced therapy dog program. Thousands of lives touched, healed, transformed through the silent work of the Hope lineage. But here's what makes you unique, Maxwell said, bringing up Michael's own psychological assessment. Most people in your situation either break down completely or wall themselves off emotionally. You found a third path. You kept giving, even when you had nothing left. Hope stood and pressed against Michael's leg, her presence both comfort and confirmation. The collar displayed new patterns, matching the rhythms of both men's heartbeats. Caroline would have recognized it immediately, Maxwell continued. The capacity to turn personal pain into universal compassion. It's rare, precious, and absolutely essential for what we do. A final set of documents appeared on screen, Caroline's therapy notes from her last cases. Page after page of observations about human resilience, about the power of unstoppable kindness, about the healing that happens when broken people help each other become whole. 7 years ago, you gave everything to save one life, Maxwell said. It broke you in one way, but strengthened you in another, just like Caroline's death broke and strengthened me. Now we have a chance to transform that shared pain into something powerful. The medical records told the rest of the story, how each Hope had been trained not just to find people in need, but to recognize those rare individuals whose spirits grew stronger in the breaking, people who could turn their own healing into a force for helping others. The blueprints glowed on the holographic display, showing the planned expansion of Maxwell's underground network. 5 new stations would connect. Across Manhattan, each designed to serve different needs while remaining invisible to the world above. The Washington Square veterans showed us something important, Michael explained to the gathered team. We need more than just shelters. We need community hubs, places where people can help each other while receiving our support. 3 weeks had transformed him. Gone were the worn street clothes, replaced by practical business attire. But the change went deeper than appearance. He moved with new purpose, speaking with the authority of someone who understood both worlds intimately. This is the proposed layout for Station 13, he continued, zooming in on one section of the blueprints. Notice how we've incorporated their existing support structure. The veterans keep their independence, their dignity, but gain resources they never imagined possible. Sarah watched from the back of the room, a slight smile showing her approval. Hope sat alertly beside her, the dog's collar synchronizing with the holographic display as different sections illuminated. Each hub will specialize, Michael explained. Medical care here, job training there, family services in this section, but they all connect underground, allowing people to access everything without exposing themselves to public scrutiny. The blueprints shifted to show the security systems, the hidden entrances, the careful integration with existing infrastructure. Maxwell's billions had bought more than just real estate. They had purchased invisibility itself. But the most important feature is this, Michael said, highlighting a central area in each station. Community spaces where people can share skills, support each other, build the connections that transform charity into genuine change. The team looked impressed. Even Rachel Chen, usually reserved with her approval, nodded thoughtfully. Michael's experience on both sides of the poverty line had given him insights none of them had considered. We've already identified potential leaders in each target community, he continued, bringing up a series of profiles. People like Eddie, who maintain their humanity and help others despite their circumstances. Hope has verified each one. The dog's collar chimed softly, confirming the assessments. The screening process had become more sophisticated since Michael joined, combining Hope's intuition with his street-level understanding of human nature. Construction begins next month, he concluded, but our real work starts now. Building trust, establishing connections, preparing people for opportunities they don't yet know exist. As the team filed out, Sarah approached with Maxwell himself. "You've exceeded expectations," Maxwell said, studying the blueprints. "These designs, they show true understanding of what we're trying to achieve." "I had good teachers," Michael replied, watching Hope make her rounds of the room, both human and canine. The blueprints rotated slowly in the air between them, showing the future taking shape beneath Manhattan's streets. A future where kindness had infrastructure, where compassion operated with precision, where hope became more than just a dog's name. "Caroline would have loved this," Maxwell said softly, "especially the community integration aspects. She always said true healing happens through connection." Michael nodded, remembering his own healing, from broken social worker to homeless survivor to something entirely new, something that combined the best of both worlds. The blueprints flickered one last time before powering down, but their promise remained. Soon, 5 new points of light would join Maxwell's constellation of hope, each one ready to catch those who fell, lift those who struggled, and transform those who still had kindness to give. The video testimonials played across the wall of screens in Maxwell's command center, each telling a story of transformation, not just of those who had received help, but of those who had given it. Wealthy individuals who had discovered their humanity through Maxwell's carefully orchestrated encounters. "Watch this one," Sarah said, highlighting a particular screen. A well-dressed investment banker spoke about his experience mentoring a formerly homeless veteran in financial technology. His voice cracked with emotion as he described how the relationship had changed him. 6 months ago, this man wouldn't make eye contact with street people, Michael observed. Now, he's one of our most valuable allies on Wall Street. Hope sat between them, her collar pulsing in harmony with the emotional resonance of the testimonials. The dog had begun accompanying Michael to high-level meetings, her presence serving as a bridge between worlds that once seemed unbridgeable. "Now the secret is making them see themselves in others," Michael continued, bringing up another testimonial. A corporate lawyer described discovering that one of the homeless men she passed every day had once been a legal aid attorney. Once they recognize the thin line between stability and crisis, everything changes. The screens shifted to show current operations. In boardrooms across Manhattan, Maxwell's converted allies were quietly changing corporate policies, creating invisible safety nets opening doors that had long been closed. But it goes both ways, Sarah noted, gesturing to another video. A former homeless woman, now cleaned up and professional, spoke about teaching empathy workshops to corporate executives. The people we help become the most powerful advocates for change. Michael nodded, remembering his own journey. When you've lived in both worlds, you speak both languages. You understand both the desperation and the privilege. A new testimonial began playing. One of the Washington Square veterans described how working with a wealthy volunteer had challenged his assumptions about the rich. "They're not all heartless," he said. "Some of them just needed someone to show them how to help." Hope's collar chimed, drawing their attention to a particular screen. A live feed showed a current interaction. A CEO spending his lunch break teaching computer skills to shelter residents. The man's body language had none of the usual charitable condescension. He was learning as much as he was teaching. Maxwell's genius, Sarah said, was understanding that transformation had to work in both directions. The wealthy need healing as much as the poor, just in different ways. The testimonials continued, each one showing another thread in the tapestry of change. Maxwell was weaving. Bankers learning humility from street philosophers, executives finding purpose in midnight shelter visits, corporate warriors discovering that their skills could build hope instead of just profits. "Look at this," Michael said, bringing up the latest data. 80% of the executives who go through our program end up changing their corporate cultures, not with grand gestures, but with quiet policy shifts, human resources practices, hiring policies. The screens showed the ripple effects. Companies quietly hiring former homeless individuals, creating emergency support funds, establishing mental health programs. Small changes that added up to systematic transformation. And the best part, Sarah added, they think it's their idea. Maxwell's name never appears. Hope's role stays hidden. The wealthy feel like heroes. The poor maintain their dignity. And real change happens in the spaces between. Hope stood and moved to the center of the room, her collar displaying a pattern. The screens responded, showing the complete web of connections her work had helped create. A network of humanity rediscovering itself, built one relationship at a time. "This is what Caroline meant," Michael said softly, "about wealth being what we give, not what we have. These people are giving each other something money can't buy. They're giving each other back their humanity." The official foundation documents carried more weight than their crisp pages suggested. Michael reviewed them carefully in Maxwell's office, each paragraph representing another piece of the legacy they were building. The Caroline Maxwell Foundation would become the public face of their hidden network, allowing them to operate even more effectively in the light. "This changes everything," Maxwell said, watching Michael read. "Once established, the foundation will let us expand beyond Manhattan. Every major city will have its own network, its own hope, its own invisible web of compassion." Hope lay, sleeping in her special bed near Maxwell's desk. The puppy would be ready for training soon, carrying forward the legacy that had changed so many lives. Her predecessor, Hope 7, sat alertly by Michael's side, collar glowing with quiet pride. "Look at Section 7, Maxwell suggested. Michael turned to the indicated page, finding his own name. He would serve as the Foundation's first director, bridging the worlds of visible philanthropy and hidden transformation. "We're not just building a foundation," Maxwell explained. "We're creating a self-sustaining system. The visible charity work funds the invisible operations. The success stories become donors. The helped become helpers. The documents outlined an intricate structure. Public programs would provide cover for the more sensitive work. Corporate partnerships would generate resources while creating employment opportunities. Everything connected, everything served multiple purposes. But this is the most important part," Maxwell said, turning to the final section. A list of names filled several pages, each one representing someone Hope had found, someone who had maintained their humanity despite everything. These would be the Foundation's hidden heart, its true board of directors. "Eddie's name is here," Michael noted with surprise. "Of course," Maxwell smiled. "He'll oversee our veteran outreach programs. Who better to understand their needs?" Sarah's team finished his background check last week. He has quite an impressive military intelligence background. The Foundation documents contained another surprise. A special addendum detailed the expansion of the Hope program. No longer just search and rescue. Now the dogs would become therapy animals, addiction counselors, trauma specialists. Caroline's original vision expanded to its full potential. "We're building something that will outlast all of us," Maxwell said quietly. "A system that can't be corrupted, because its true power lies in the invisible connections between people who understand both suffering and hope." Michael looked up from the papers, seeing the future taking shape. The network would grow, adapt, evolve. Each new hope would find more people like him, like Eddie, like the countless others who had never lost their capacity for kindness. Their hidden army of compassion would expand, working in the shadows to rebuild the world one life at a time. "Time to make it official," Maxwell said, offering Michael a pen that had belonged to Caroline. "Time to transform your fall from grace into a foundation for others to rise." As Michael signed, Hope Seven's collar chimed softly, acknowledging another piece of her mission completed. She had found someone who could carry forward Caroline's dream, who understood that true power lay not in wealth or position, but in the quiet moments when one human being reached out to help another. The new collar gleamed in Michael's hands, its advanced technology concealed beneath elegant simplicity. Like everything in Maxwell's world, its true power lay hidden beneath an unassuming surface. Hope Seven sat patiently as he made the exchange, retiring her old collar for this next-generation version. "Perfect timing," Maxwell said from his penthouse doorway. "The first graduates are arriving. 1 year had transformed everything." Michael stood at the window, watching as a group of formerly homeless individuals entered the building through a discreet private entrance. Each one had been chosen by Hope, transformed by the network, and now returned to help others. The invisible army growing stronger with each passing day. "Remember your first night here?" Sarah asked, joining them at the window. "Now look at you. Director of the Caroline Maxwell Foundation by day, commander of our shadow network by night." Michael smiled, touching the photograph he still kept in his jacket pocket, not as a reminder of what he'd lost, but as a testament to how far he'd come. The social worker in the image could never have imagined this future. Below, Eddie led the graduation procession. His military bearing had returned, along with his sense of purpose. As head of veteran operations, he had already established 3 new underground stations, specifically for former service members. "They're ready for you," Maxwell said softly. Michael nodded, straightening his tie. Hope's new collar pulsed with a gentle blue light as they walked together toward the private elevator. The same elevator that had first brought him into this hidden world now carried him down to help welcome others. The underground graduation hall filled with quiet conversation. Former executives sat next to former street people, all united by their commitment to Maxwell's mission. Hope moved among them, her collar registering the success of her choices. Every person here had been selected by her careful assessment of human potential. 1 year ago, Michael began, stepping to the podium, a dog found me in Central Park. I thought I had nothing left to give. I was wrong. We were all wrong. Every person in this room proved that wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in our capacity for kindness. Faces in the audience nodded with understanding. They had all walked different paths to this hidden place, but they shared the same truth. True change happened in whispers, not shouts. Real power lay in the quiet moments of human connection. Today, You join something larger than yourselves, he continued. A network built on a simple truth that Jerome Maxwell discovered. The most powerful acts of kindness are the ones the world never sees. Hope sat proudly beside him, her new collar glowing stronger. Through the audience, other therapy dogs in training watched attentively, the next generation of hopes ready to find more hidden heroes. Some of you will work in our shelters, Michael explained. Others will guide our corporate partners. Many will return to your old lives as our silent ambassadors. But all of you now carry forward a legacy of invisible compassion. Maxwell stepped forward, carrying a small box. Inside lay tokens, similar to the one that had first granted Michael access to this underground world. Each one represented a door opening, a life transforming, a ripple of change spreading outward. The world above will never know your names, Michael concluded. Your greatest achievements will never make headlines, but you will know. You will see the lives you touch, the hope you create, the change you inspire. And somewhere out there, a dog named Hope will be finding others, like you, building our network one quiet miracle at a time. The graduation ceremony continued, each new operative receiving their token, their assignment, their chance to help rewrite the story of human kindness. Through it all, Hope remained by Michael's side, her collar pulsing with the rhythm of possibility. Later, that night, standing again at the penthouse window, Michael watched the city lights with new eyes. Somewhere in those streets, another Hope would soon find another lost soul. Another life would transform. Another thread would join the invisible tapestry of compassion they were weaving across Manhattan. Ready for tomorrow? Maxwell asked, joining him at the window. Michael felt Hope press against his leg, her new collar glowing with quiet confidence. Always, he replied. There are still so many out there waiting to be found. Together, they watched their hidden world expand. One act of kindness at a time, invisible to most but shining brightly for those who knew where to look.